So, joining us now on Open Book, an award-winning filmmaker, journalist, best-selling author, Natasha Lance Rogoff. The book is titled Muppets in Moscow. What a great title and an amazing book. Muppets in Moscow, the unexpected, crazy, true story of making Sesame Street in Russia. So Holly and I, my producer, Natasha, were both remarking that the book felt like a thriller novel, like I was reading Le Carre or Daniel Silva or somebody like that. You obviously write about your consumption of Russian literature and how you were a Russophile, I guess would be the right way to call this. I mean, you changed your name at age 16 to Natasha, which is a beautiful Russian name, and you lived in Russia when it was the Soviet Union. So, what was it about Russia for you before we get into the book?
Well, first, I just want to thank you for having me on the show. I love your podcast, and your interviewing is so personal. So I love how it reveals a lot about the people that you talk to.
Well, it's very nicey, but I do try to read these books before I get started. That's why I think I have so much fun with this. But go ahead. Why Natasha? Why'd you change your name? Why'd you go to Russia? Tell us what
well,
love affair is.
well, I was really, seduced by Russia early on. I mean, my grandfather spoke Russian and had left Belarus in 1912 and then immigrated to the U.S. via Germany. So I had heard Russian as well as Yiddish growing up. And, it was very intriguing, the stories that he told. And then a lot of the fairy tales, they were so dark. And then by the time I was in high school and reading Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, the literature really spoke to me. I mean, I just it was so different. The kind of the absurdist characters, the deep spirituality and cruelty as well. So I definitely got hooked early, and then later in college was kind of fascinated with dictatorships, both Nazi Germany and uh, communism in general later on. So I really wanted to visit this place, and then moved there when I was 22 as part of a U.S. Russian or Soviet Union exchange program.
When you talk about the cruelty, it's interesting because like someone said to me, because I've read a lot of Russian literature, and if someone said to me, "What is it?" I had a Russian literature professor in college that thought it was two things. I just want to test this on you, get your reaction. He thought it was the weather. He thought that the weather created some level of harshness and created some level of poverty, which allowed for people to have looser ethics in terms of their quote unquote cruelty. And he also thought that the interesting location of Russia, it's crossing 11 time zones, and it's on the Eurasian plane, if you will, the dual continents of Europe and Asia, but it's not quite Asian, and it's never been fully accepted by Europe. And so there's a little bit of a chip on the shoulder of the Russian culture. So what are your thoughts on that? That was from a college professor 35 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's right. It bridges between East and West in terms of its culture, and certainly, in terms of like designing puppets and coming up with a new children's TV show that was going to reflect their culture. We were constantly facing that issue of bridging the East and the West, as well as these themes that recur and are certainly present today. Russian nationalism, this idea that the West is trying to destroy Russia, that the West doesn't understand Russia, and that the values are very different. So I think your professor definitely was right about that, and there's a great deal of literature, regarding how much this sort of you know inferiority complex, as well coupled with a superiority complex,
Yeah, it goes.
plays into our dynamics, even to the present. It's just incredible how persistent these themes are, how strong the culture is, and how distinct it is from traditional Western democratic culture. But I would have to say, don't agree with the weather part, because there's plenty of countries that have similar weather, like Finland or Sweden, or other countries in the north, and they have a very different political system trajectory.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's good. It's a very good point. I think we have a mutual friend in Bill Browder, who's written a couple of best-selling books recently about his tangles.
Fantastic book. Yeah.
Yeah, about his tangles with the Russian government. One of the things he says in those books are that the people are incredibly children-centric. That you can bring young kids to five-star restaurants in Moscow, and they can be rabble rousing in the restaurant, absolutely no problem. Tell us a little bit about that aspect of the culture. So they've got this loving aspect, they've got this vacillation between superiority, inferiority, but there's a lot of love in that culture too. Am I wrong in saying that?
No, no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, before I was tasked to, lead the team to make Sesame Street in Russia, I had been making documentaries in what was then the Soviet Union, for 10 years already. And I thought I understood the culture. I made films on the collapse of the Soviet Union, on nationality questions, um, underground rock and roll. I mean, a lot, quite a bit that had spanned many different diverse areas of the culture. But in working with a team of over 400 artists from Moscow, many of them Russian, also Ukrainian and Georgian and other nationalities, but I was struck by how much I didn't understand about the culture. And it was only through the experience of making a show for their children that I grew to understand the culture in a much deeper way. And maybe that's because of exactly what you're talking about, Anthony, which is that, they do have a sense of, children being sacred, and a sense of how valuable they are because of their innocence. Maybe it's the juxtaposition of the difficulty, the suffering that many, that adults in Russia have gone through for so many um, centuries, really. And so when you're talking about children and the dreams and hopes that my colleagues had in creating this new TV show, it was incredibly emotional. Very intense discussions, about what they wanted for their children in the future, especially after the Soviet Union collapsed. And they had the opportunity, with some support from the US government, from then Senator Biden and Sesame Street, to create this new show. And their ideas, they had so many really ambitious ideas in terms of what was the new neighborhood that they wanted to create, and what are the values that they wanted their children to embrace, related to freedom, tolerance, freedom of expression. So I think, in that sense, it was more poignant to them, uh, what impact the program could have, because they had this sense of the importance of children and how their upbringing will shape the future of Russia.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. So you go on, you produce these two documentaries. You have this full-on love affair. I wanted to bring up the children because it fuses nicely with Sesame Street. And you're in Russia. It's 30 years ago. You are making Sesame Street in Russia. How is it different from Sesame Street in the U.S.? I mean, you write about it eloquently in the book. Just tell our viewers and listeners, how is it different? What are you learning as you go through the process of putting the show together?
Well, I had totally, I'd say not expected the challenges that we encountered, and our initial sponsors of the show. One of them was blown up in a car bombing. That was very different from making Sesame Street in the U.S. And as well as our partners at the TV station who ran the TV station, uh, two of them were assassinated within the space of a year. And so the violence that we were dealing with, it was a period in the late 1990s of incredible I'm sorry, early 1990s or mid 1990s, of incredible lawlessness, corruption, and violence. So that was one major difference. And then, the other part is what I think is the heart and soul of the book, is the cultural differences, the ways that the show differed from the U.S. And that was from the very beginning. Even when I showed the first videos of Sesame Street, because my colleagues in Moscow didn't know the show. Some people were familiar with the Muppet Show that Jim Henson had tried to bring to Russia earlier. But when I showed the Muppets themselves, my team members didn't like them. They were like, who, these Muppets, they don't look like our puppets. We have our own revered puppet tradition dating back to the 16th century. And, why do we need to use your American Muppets?
Yeah.
So that was like the first step. And I did not expect that, I thought everybody would love the Muppets. And then,
Well, it's like
and then in
bringing
the,
Starbucks coffee to Italy, right? It's hard to do because the Italians have a certain way that they do their coffee, you know.
yeah, well, I understand that about the
Right.
coffee though.
Right.
But the other thing is the content itself. Like, initially we assembled a group of uh, local educators who had come from all across the former Soviet Union, as far as Siberia. And we brought them together with the creative team of producers and writers and animators, puppeteers. And this team, wanted to talk about, how are we going to teach this new young children and their families about a different open society, which included a free market system, not a command economy. So initially I had suggested, well, in the US, we've done scenarios where we've shown children running a lemonade stand. And, if you remember from the book, this was just, people met this idea with horror, and they were just said, look, the only people who sell things on the street in Russia, in Moscow, are criminals and mafia. And so we don't want our children selling things on the street. So there were all these, you were dealing with a country that was shifting from a completely different type of communist, a different type of system, a communist system, to a more open society with a free market. And there were many times when, there were difficulties understanding how we were going to bridge the almost a lack of understanding of what it meant to have a free and open society.
You know, I got the feeling that there was, I don't want to use the word naivete because that's not the right word, but there was a idealism in the approach that you guys were taking that was met with the aftermath of 70 years of cynicism that was generated by this communist culture. And so describe that intersection. Here you guys are coming in with this great idealistic vision. great programming idea, but yet you're meeting the forces of the post-communist Russian bureaucracy, if you will. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, part of what was really important to me when I agreed to take the job, and I had no experience with children's television before this, so I was pretty intimidated. But one of the things I insisted on is that we produce the show independently, that we do not work exclusively with the state television um, entity, which was, a Stankina, because the whole idea was that we were going to help support and create an infrastructure for independent television. Because we were working with so many independent people, including a lot of the uh, rock musicians to write and compose original music for Sesame Street, because the music is so important for a new show, that a lot of these people had really been persecuted and denied opportunities for many years under communism. So I would say that, we had a combination of people who worked for the state in television, and people who were independent. And so there was a lot of tension between these two groups, because the people who were more independent actually shared our idealism, and they were extremely willing to make incredible sacrifices of their time, and working so hard, to create content that was going to blow the minds of young children and their parents in a way that was so good, that would make them laugh, feel that they could do anything, that anything was possible. And so we had to work with this team that really encompassed not only generational differences, but value differences. So those people that you're talking about, Anthony, the ones that were hesitant, I also understood that it's very hard to change, and all of these changes in post-Soviet society were happening very fast. And at the same time, there were, tons of recent Harvard MBA grads flooding into the country, and, working with Russia's own new oligarchs. And everybody was trying to make a lot of money, but we weren't. We were part of the nonprofit NGO community, trying to work with the Russian community and the Moscow artists, and meet them where they were, and to try to develop a show that would reflect their own culture and their own values where they were. We weren't, I wouldn't say that we were pushing so hard. We were trying to be very sensitive to what was possible
You know,
because of their cultural and historical background.
yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating. I could let you go on forever. I want you to address the creativity, the artistry, the Russian pride in putting together the programming. Tell us a little bit about that, your experience with that.
Well, previous to this, I had worked in Mexico doing Plaza Sesamo, which was a great experience. But working in Russia was like on a completely other level. It was the artists that I was working with, we had brought in from cinematography, from theater, and that was because Russia's TV industry prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union was mostly used for propaganda. And the traditions that we had developed in the US, a 3-camera shoot, synchronized audio recording, a lot of these methodologies that we had used for developing entertainment TV had not been adopted in Russia yet.
Mhm.
And we introduced these elements. At the same time, we were working with some of the most creative, passionate, and brilliant artists many of whom have had to flee since the war started, more than a year ago, because they had been active against the war and against Putin long before that. These artists uh, developed the content. We had, as I say, over 400 people working on the show, which is phenomenal. And that included animators, puppeteers, set designers. The set designer who developed the new neighborhood for Ulica Sezam, which means Sesame Street in Russian,
Mm-hmm.
she came from theater and had never made a set for television before. And the chief director, Volodya Gramatikov, he was really one of the top directors for children's cinema. And he also hadn't done television before. So we were very lucky to work with this group.
So now, while you're doing this, there's a rise of Vladimir Putin. He is now ascending to power, and he's going to effectively take over. And what looked like could have been a burgeoning democracy is returning back to a KGB, FSB style autocracy. And some things happen, right? He fires the director of research. Tell us how Vladimir Putin fired the director of research. I don't want to give the whole book away, by the way, but the book is just so fascinating, and it just speaks to the censorship and control and the fear that autocrats have of people who are intellectually free.
Yeah, and it happened gradually. So the show aired for the first time in 1996, and it lasted until 2010, with multiple seasons of 2 years each, approximately. And the show aired on Russia's 2 top TV stations across 11 time zones to millions and millions, tens of millions of children. So today, when I was in Moscow in January of 2020, so right before the pandemic, doing interviews for this. And I asked my colleagues, how did the show end? Because I had heard all kinds of things. And it turns out that, just prior to this happening is when there was an increased crackdown on independent media. It eventually got way worse, but at this time it was already beginning, and there was sort of a grab for the puppet show from Ostankino, from now called ORT, to control it. And whether that was because of the content or because of the advertising, because you had, it was also making money from advertising with bookend advertisements on either side. But in any case, the executives who were appointed by Putin in 2010, some just fired the research director who had been there since the beginning, and for no reason. And the rest of the team quit in solidarity, and that's how the show ended.
But there's an undercurrent there that I want you to address, because you are such a student of the culture. The show is ending, so there's this window, this opportunity of artistic, creative, business freedom, but yet for whatever reason, I guess it's getting out of control for certain conventional thinkers in Russia. And so they're now trying to return the country back to this sort of iron fisted approach. And so your show has to go, right? The free press has to go. The creativity has to go in order to instill that, right? So there's tragedy in that, right? But it's very consistent with the Russian story, right? It's thread into old school Russian literature, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I also think that, one of the reasons why this book has been, resonating with readers is that this period of time in the 1990s and leading up to where the challenges, with with the government emerged, is that this period is part of Putin's narrative. He uses the 1990s and what the West did supposedly in Russia at this time, and to some extent, there's some truth in that, to justify his regime's actions and aggressions in Ukraine. And I think it's very important to look at what happened in the earlier period that led to where we are today. And that's what I try to do. It sounds really bizarre, because it's a children's puppet show, a comedy show. But that was the goal of writing the book, was to really bring you into this culture, to try to understand it better through the creation of this TV show. But then also, by the end of it, you have an understanding of where we are today because you've gone through this process, and you can see how the conservative values influence the creation of the show, and where we were able to divert from those values, and where the community of people is, where they embrace ideas of openness and freedom, because those people still exist in Russia and outside of Russia.
So that's the seminal question. I mean, I have so many questions for you, but that is the seminal question. Those people still exist. Can they overpower the autocratic people? Can there be a free Russia? We have hundreds of years, if not 1,000 years, of levels of repression in Russia. Can that end?
Well, certainly it's going to take a long time. And one of I'll tell you a story about the auditions, which made me understand this in a very visceral way, where we were auditioning about 1,200 children for the show. And they had come from all over the former Soviet Union. They were very nervous about, they were anywhere from like 6 to 12 years old. And I was sitting in the back of the room, and the chief director invited each child to come in and audition one at a time. And the first little boy comes in, and he sings this song from World War II. And it goes something like, the planet is burning, everything is lost. It was just like very depressing. And I asked the director, okay, that's kind of strange for, a kid auditioning for a children's comedy show, but there was no time to talk. And then the next little girl comes in, and she sings this song called Katusha, which is about her lover going off to the front in World War II. So when I talked to the director at lunchtime, I said, "What's going on with this? And why are they singing all these sad songs?" I was kind of expecting Itsy Bitsy Spider or Old MacDonald Had a Farm. And he says, "Natasha, you don't understand. You think of these songs as sad. They're not sad. They're lyrical." And then he says something which just shocks me, which is that, our children sing these songs with their grandmothers, and these songs are comforting for them. And they read poetry from a very young period in their lives, and they expect sadness in their poetry, in their music, and in their lives. So when you take this background that I've had in this country, for more than 15 years, and I apply that forward, trying to answer your question about, what is possible for Russia in the future, and how will it change? So often in the West, we expect countries to mirror our own, and they have different historical trajectories, as you know. I mean, you love history too, and it's naive to have such expectations. It's going to take time for any country that is experiencing a dictatorship to change. And we will see this in Venezuela as well. It's going to take time, you know, even if there is a change there. And also, people's values change slowly, but there's certainly a large number of people there that have tasted freedom and freedom of expression, an independent free press, the right not to go to jail for speaking out against the war, and those people don't disappear.
It's it's, uh, it's super interesting because it we're here again. Ultimately, there's a. I mean, you tell me. Maybe I'm wrong. The vessel of autocracy seems to be cracking a little, and I would like to get your reaction to Prigozhin. What's going on with Vladimir Putin right now? Is there an opportunity for a reopening? Is there going to be a further crackdown? Obviously, there are people in our agency, the CIA. They think that there could be worse, more conservative people than Vladimir Putin rising to power in Russia. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, I would temper whatever I say with, I'm sure you've spoken to many high level people who know a lot more than I do as a,
Well,
children's television producer.
but you have
But
intuition when you read your book Muppets in Moscow. You have a hand on the pulse. Our agency so many times, and not to be offensive to them, but they get things wrong because they're looking at data and they're not. There's doctors that analyze the tests and they treat the tests, and there's other doctors that actually treat the patient. You're somebody that actually understands the patient and the body politic. So what do you think is going to
well,
happen?
yeah, I mean, I will say I made a film in 1991 which predicted the coup. And a lot of my professors at Columbia had not done that. But on the ground, talking to people and covering, I was embedded with the hardline conservatives who then led the coup. So, I was off by 3 weeks because I thought Russians wouldn't give up their August vacation. I thought it would happen in September, but that's the case. And I have to say, when this whole thing happened with Prigozhin, I had told my husband, we talk about this, and I said, I think this is what's going to happen. And then it happened. And I do share the CIA's concern about a worst case scenario coming, a, potential breakup of the different ethnic groups and civil war in Russia. I speak with people on WhatsApp all the time, friends of mine, former colleagues, and people are terrified. Nobody wants war. Nobody wants, they want to, they're the world and the place to be safe where their children are living and to have opportunity. So in that sense, this is a situation where there are a lot of different pressures, different forces that can break apart this country. And in speaking with some of my colleagues, they express that concern. So that doesn't mean I advocate, you know, keeping Putin in power.
No.
What he's done is horrific, and I was just in London last week talking with a woman who came to London just after the war with her two children, and she hasn't seen her husband in a year.
Mhm.
He's on the front lines. So this is horrible, and um, but I do think the potential for something to be far worse is there. When is the last time we were talking realistically about nuclear war?
Yeah, well, a long time ago. I mean, unfortunately, we're products of the bomb shelter generation, right? Where we remember that stuff and what a
Absolutely.
fallout
Yeah.
shelter sign looked like. But I guess, I saw I was in Europe and I saw call it a coup, call it a protestation, whatever you want to call it, from Prigozhin. And I said to myself, wow, I've got you coming up on my podcast. I'm dying to talk to you, so I want to keep going if you don't mind. Um, you have a good insight into the culture and the children of Russia. And we're in a different world now, Natasha. This is just my opinion. We have this
Yeah.
social media exposure now. It's very tough for the Chinese government to isolate their people through censorship. It's very tough for the Russian government to do the same. The world is changing. Okay, I'll accept some of the elements of the world are getting worse, but a lot of the world is getting better. There's a lot of big opportunities out there. Are the Russian autocrats going to be able to hold back the aspirational Russians, or will they eventually get run over by them?
That is the big question. And it is true that the internet changes the scale here. And when I spoke with some of my colleagues, they had said, well, it is different from the period that you were working there, when it was the Soviet Union and there was no internet. And, he says, these are the kids, they're the TikTok generation. And they're not going to be comfortable giving up their use of the internet and TikTok and everything over time. But that wasn't my experience when I went back in 2017. I did a film called Russian Millennials Speak Openly About America. And my impression was that people were generally extremely careful and they were self-censoring. And these are people in their 20s. So once I saw that, I thought, oh boy, this is so dangerous. That coupled with the crushing of the entire independent free press, and then being able to control access to the internet, just as China does.
Yeah, makes sense.
So the fact is, over time, these autocracies that are growing in number from the perspective of our democratic country, with our own problems, I think that they can be very successful by controlling media and limiting the information that people have. And or if they don't believe what they're being told, in other words, what is the level of success of the propaganda, then they self-censor due to fear.
Yeah.
Because they can't, a lot of people can't leave the country. They're there taking care of their kids. They're taking care of their parents. More than 1 million people have left. And, what gives me great comfort is a lot of these people that I talk to now in London, from Georgia, Ukraine, Russia, they all grew up on Ulitsa Sezam, and they speak to me about that experience of how the show influenced their childhood. So I believe that ultimately, if we get the chance again, that we'll be able to go back and do the show again. But that's questionable, how long it's going to take for this to shift again.
It's interesting. Well, I think I don't know, feels like something's changing again. And I think you're going to be a part of it, Natasha. So I'm looking forward to catching up with you. I'm at the part of our podcast now where I have 5 words from my authors. I'm going to read you the words, and then you can react. You can give me a 1-word answer or a paragraph answer. I just want to get your reaction to the word or the 2 words. Okay, you ready?
Sure.
Soviet Union.
Dictatorship.
Okay. Russia.
Can I answer with more than 1 word?
Yeah, you can give me a paragraph. 1 word, paragraph.
A beautiful spiritual country with brilliant, ambitious people that hope for a better future for their country and their children.
Okay, it's very powerful. Putin.
A war criminal.
Okay. I'm not going to do the best job of pronouncing this because I'm an Italian kid from Long Island. Ready? Ulista, Ulista Sesam.
Ulitza Sesam.
You're right. There.
Very
That's right. You're going to say it.
almost there.
Okay.
Uh, a fabulous children's television show that was created by collaboration between Moscow artists who are Russian, Ukrainian, Georgian, and Armenian, and Americans who believed that they could create a vision of a new, more open society, first on a little screen, and then hopefully in real life for millions of children.
Very, very cool. Okay. Last one. Ready?
Yep.
Sesame Street.
Sesame Street is a, let me think. Sesame Street is probably one of the most popular children's television shows that has programs all over the world and continues to help children laugh, learn, play, and express themselves with freedom for years to come.
You know, it's interesting because when we were writing this script for our podcast, when we put Sesame Street down, you know what my reaction was, all of us have a little bit of Sesame Street in us. Meaning at some point in our life, we've watched Sesame Street. You've created it and produced it, but from 1969 to today, every family, every child has had a little pizza slice of their life tied to Sesame Street and know the more recognized characters, as it makes it so fascinating, you know?
Yeah, no, it's something, I mean, when you think about how many things we share, like as a entire nation, you know, maybe it's like NFL football or, you know, basketball or, you know, they're just certain things. But Sesame Street is this universal, you know, unifying idea for the entire country.
Yep. And as you said, in many parts of the world now. So we have a television series coming, Muppets in Moscow. What do you think?
We hope so. Well, I signed with CAA, which is a great thrill, completely unexpected. And, you know, it's this whole writing of the book and publishing the book has been life-changing. And I do hope, of course, there is a writer's strike and a actor strike currently. So
we got some rough stuff going on.
It's not going to happen right now.
No, but it will. It will happen. It's a fascinating story, and it'll get a lot of buzz, and it's something that will catch on. And I look forward to watching it when it eventually happens. So, well, first off, thank you so much for joining Open Book. The title of the book is Muppets in Moscow: The Unexpected, Crazy True Story of Making Sesame Street in Russia. Natasha Lance Rogoff, thank you for joining Open Book today.
Thank you so much, Anthony. This was great and just fabulous conversation. As
if you want to be big, if you want to punch way over your weight, then you've got to enable other people to achieve the things that you're hoping to achieve. You've got to co-create. You've got to expand that team.
We're in it together. It doesn't matter your position. Think about the organization a little flatter. Don't think about it so ordinate. I tell people we work with each other. You work with me. You don't work for me. It wasn't like I was having the lunch with the person, Keith. Okay, what's Keith going to do for me today? It's the opposite. What am I going to do today for Keith?
Very few people in the United States claimed that people had their back. In fact, 50% of Americans said that no one had their back when you defined it as 4 things. Number 1, somebody that would always tell you the truth when you didn't want to hear it or whether you did. Somebody that cared about you. Somebody that was generously trying to support you out in the world, even when you weren't around, and somebody that had butt-kicking accountability to you and hold you accountable. Intimacy, generosity, candor, and accountability.
Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us now, one of my favorite authors, Keith Ferrazzi, fellow Italian-American, #1 best-selling New York Times author. New book out, Never Lead Alone, 10 Shifts from Leadership to Teamship, which is such a great title. But Listen, man, you've written 5 amazing books. I was introduced to you uh, by book, by the way. I read Never Eat Alone, which I thought was one of the best networking books that I've read in my life, and I've shared it with all of my salespeople, my children. I'll tell you what I told people about Never Eat Alone. And this is not the flattery. I really mean this. I said, hey, you want to add $10 million to your net worth? Most people say, yes, yes, I do. Okay, go out and buy Keith Ferrazzi's book, Never Eat Alone. Because if you read the book and you follow the principles in that book, you're going to build a network of success, which is going to lead to great riches. So
Yeah,
anyway.
I had some great mentors like Mike Milken.
Yeah.
I worked for Mike for a few years, and he taught me what really breeds loyalty in people is health, wealth, and children. Health, wealth, and children. And you take a look at Mike's career and what he's done for people with prostate cancer. You take a look at how he has, of course, lived his life helping other people get rich. And just this idea to be there for people's most important intimate moments, like helping a kid get an internship, etc. And if you can wrap all of that with authenticity, that level of generosity with authenticity, you'll have a rich network that's there for you and you for them forever.
Well, I think it's very well said. And Mike Milken, we all, if we meet Mike Milken, we all have a Mike Milken story, by the way. And
Indeed.
so I met Mike Milken for the first time in 2009. I asked him for help on my conference in Las Vegas, and he gladly accepted my invitation to come speak. He gave one of the best speeches ever coming out of the global financial crisis. We've been friends since that period of time, and he's helped more than one of my friends with health-related issues, prostate cancer, but other health-related issues. He would be the go-to person for me in so many different situations. And so, and it's something
I'll tell
about
you,
Mike. Yeah, go ahead,
I'll tell you
please.
my Mike Milken story. We'll swap.
Please.
We'll swap them.
Yeah.
My Mike Milken story was, he's an incredibly busy man, and I was hired as the CEO of one of his portfolio companies in the computer game space. And when I would want time with him, I could never get through his admins because he was booked up with Rupert Murdoch and all these other individuals. So what I would do is I would send her a message, and I would copy Mike, and I would lead with, I know Mike probably doesn't want to get up this early, but I'd be happy to show up anytime, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, etc. And I always got that spot to show up at Mike's because Mike is the hardest working human in the world. And he would never say no to a meeting, particularly if somebody dared to say, I don't think Mike gets up that early. So that's how I always got on his agenda at 4:30 in the morning.
Love it. I love the story. And, he has helped so many people here on Wall Street as well. And, I will say this about Michael. He's an innovator. And when you're an innovator, you're taking risks, and some people are trying to shoot at you at the same time. You gotta deal with that. Throughout history, that happens. So, but I love the fact that we both have that connection as well. So
I was excited for a moment I really wanted to hear your perspective on this new book relative to high performing teams in financial services. So after I wrote that book, it was really a book. Never Eat Alone was a book about how I developed success. It's how I became the youngest partner at Deloitte, how I ended up going and working for Barry Sternlicht as the chief marketing officer at Starwood Hotels in the early days, head of sales over there. But when I left and I went for Mike, and then we sold a company and had a little bit of money, I started this research institute because I fundamentally believed we were spending not enough time looking at high performing teams. And I've now spent 24 years researching high performing teams. And what does it make? What makes a high performing team? I sat in Jeff Bezos's team and watched how that team wrestled ideas to the ground with data and with a challenge culture. I've gone deep with Jamie Dimon in terms of understanding how he's built his team, and I've extracted a set of practices. And it is my belief that a high performing team, it's not what the leader does per se, it's what the leader gets the team to do. So the leaders, we talk about leadership. Leaders give feedback, but how do you get a team to give each other feedback? How do you get a team to hold each other accountable? How do you get a team to lift up each other's energy? So this book is the curation of 24 years of research on how do leaders get teams to step up 30% and meet them in leadership. And I was curious about financial services. Like I said, I've talked at Jamie Dimon's level, at his executive team. He was very quick to say, my teams have to have each other's back. They actually have to care about each other. They have to tell each other the truth. They have to push each other higher. And if you walked into one of his meetings, notoriously, in an argument, if you obviously know who Jamie Dimon is, but if you didn't, you wouldn't know who the leader was because the team was wrestling the ideas. And I'm curious what your impression is of financial services in general and whether or not you see that degree of teamship, or because Jamie does it, it's so unique, which has allowed him to be so breakaway.
Well, I mean, a couple of things. I would say that I think Steve Schwartzman and his team did a lot of what you describe in your book at Blackstone. Larry Fink did a lot of that at BlackRock. If I'm really thinking about the different teams that I'm close to, I've really tried to incorporate a lot of the lessons that you have in your books into my team. One of the things that you talk about is teamship. I mean, the subtitle of this book, and I've really tried to do that in my little organization. I listen. We punch over our weight at Skybridge. I think we've got a couple billion under management. I'm able to write books, do podcasts. I'm able to have these public speaking events. I'm able to do conferences primarily because I have a good team, and I'm able to delegate authority and empower people. I think one of the things that you talk about that I love, and certainly Jamie Dimon does this, Jeff Bezos certainly does this, is trust. You're delegating, but you're also delegating to people that you really trust. And then if something goes wrong, you're not castigating anybody. You're not putting blame on people. It's almost like you're sharing the credit, Keith, but you're absorbing the pain of a bad decision, which further empowers your people to be more independent. And that's stuff that you write about. But you've got something in all 5 of your books, if you don't mind me saying this to you, and I'd like you to react to it. All 5 of your books we're in it together. Okay, never eat lunch alone. The person you're eating lunch with, you're going to help them. And guess what? They're going to help you. We're in it together. Never lead alone. Well, guess what? We're in it together. Okay, it doesn't matter your position. Think about the organization a little flatter. Okay, don't think about it so ordinate. When I read, Never Eat Alone, I remember I was right around the time I started Skybridge. It was, I think you wrote the book almost 20 years ago. And I remember telling
20-year
people,
anniversary this year.
Yeah, so there you go. So I tell people, we work with each other. You work with me. You don't work for me. That's a concept that comes out of, that comes out of all 5 of your books. But your first book, even though it was about networking, it resonated with me that I was in the network to help. It wasn't like I was having the lunch with the person, Keith. Okay, what's Keith going to do for me today? It's the opposite. What am I going to do today for Keith?
More importantly, what can we create together? And that's the power, right?
Yeah,
and I lived my life.
That's your brilliance, if you don't mind. And again, I didn't invite you on just to praise you, but I invited you on because I want my people, I want my podcast listeners to get your gestalt. I want my podcast listeners to hear your theology about this.
Yeah. So let me walk you through the next book after Never Eat Alone. The next book after Never Eat Alone was about building that broad network. And there's no question, the germination of all the core essence of relationships are the key to your success. How do you create massive productivity through the relationships that you have in your life, personally and professionally? What I then did was I started studying, if a broad network is powerful, what happens when a small group of people are disproportionately important to you? And I went and I studied AA programs, YPO forums that transformed and created Charles Schwab's business from, just a little brokerage house. And all of a sudden his tech buddy said, hey, there's this internet thing you should look at. And that was his YPO forum that created Schwab to the next level because he had a group of people that had his back. And so I wrote a book, Who's Got Your Back? And I started studying the disproportionate impact that small groups of people have on each other. And what we found back then was that very few people in the United States, this was 15 years ago, claimed that people had their back. In fact, 50% of Americans said that no one had their back when you defined it as 4 things. Number one, somebody that would always tell you the truth when you didn't want to hear it or whether you did. Somebody that cared about you, somebody that was generously trying to support you out in the world, even when you weren't around, and somebody that had butt-kicking accountability to you and hold you accountable. Intimacy, generosity, candor, and accountability. So what we found was that that was so rare. And then I started creating a diagnostic tool for businesses. And I found that those things were not present in teams. The average team on a scale of 0 to 5 has a scale of 1.9 relative to can we challenge each other in the room when it's most risky to do so. And then I started tracking the correlation between teams that had low candor scores, Midwest nice companies that have more politics because they're so damn polite. Now, I don't
Right.
mean polite to be disrespectful, but
No,
I mean when
I
you
understand.
usually polite in business usually means in so many businesses that I'm not going to tell you the truth to your face. I'll tell it to you behind your back. And that's bullshit.
Well,
And so we
listen,
started
I had that
mapping
problem early in
these
my career. I
attributes.
get it. I was a total conflict avoider earlier in my career.
Me
You know,
too.
I tell people you can be tough, but also nice. But you got to tell people, hey, it's not working. Here's why it's not working. You know, because if you don't do that, then you're in this sort of sclerosis. You know, but
So
you talk about having somebody's
let me
back.
just stay
Though,
on this
go
one.
ahead. Go
I want to
ahead.
stay on this one because this is probably one of the most erosive elements of business, conflict avoidance. And so what I realized was there are very few cultures that hired for candor. Ray Dalio did, you know, and he wrote his book Principles about it. Um, Bezos did, and they continue to do so at Amazon. But very, very few people hired for the resilience of candor. I would have never gotten hired. I was always conflict avoidant, etc. So what I realized was we could create new practices that would bring this kind of candor to life, just simple process and practice. Because what I want to focus on as an industrial engineer was that process and practice changes culture. It's not difficult. I created something called a stress test, and it's one of the most powerful tools. And instead of having somebody in your team give a report out of their progress or report out of an initiative, you tell everybody in the room, we're not going to do report outs anymore. We're only going to do stress tests. A stress test moves from we are all deciding that we are going to help this person be successful. That's a stress test versus a report out where we're passively listening to somebody's status. So the person gives their status. They said, okay, here's what I've achieved. Here's where I'm struggling. And it's important that they announce where they're struggling. And here's where I'm going next. You could do this to a sales rep. Once a month, your sales reps stand in front of their peers and say, last month, here's what I did. Last month, here's where I struggled. Next month, here's where I'm going. And then the team goes into groups of 2. Now, in groups of 2, psychological safety goes up 85% versus in a big room. And they open up a document and they say, here's what you might be missing. Write it down. Here's an idea for you. Write it down. Here's where I'd be willing to help. Write it down. What we just did is we turned the culture that you want to have into a simple assignment, and people do it. So in a room of 12, 4 people will have the courage to be heard. But when you do these breakout conversations and you actually write stuff down, 100% compliance happens. And now the person gets a full breadth of candor. The team can actually give that criticism. I'm doing this right now for a major global CPG company that's in decline. And we're going to turn this company around just by the team stepping up and making sure that everybody is stress testing supply chain. Everybody is stress testing IT and our progress on AI. Everybody is stress testing the particular business, the line of business, call it whatever it is, confectionaries. So this idea of doing a simple practice can be game changing. And the book is full of 37 of those practices that I feel are so game changing that it can turn your culture into the kind of culture that Amazon has.
I appreciate you sharing all those remarks. I'll even take it one step further with you. I think that some people get this and some people don't get this, and so what I mean by that is I have some of my competitors that I call bottleneckers. What do I mean by that? They got to make every decision, Keith. Okay, okay, we can't move until ABC, our chief, says yes or no. Okay, that's a great idea. Can't run with it. He's on vacation on a yacht somewhere. We got to wait for him to say yes or no. Think about how that kills a culture and think about how that kills a business.
Cycle time.
Yeah,
That's why we have such long cycle times of getting shit done.
Exactly. And we just did this event in Wyoming. It was a blockchain event. Somebody said to me, "Oh, Anthony, congratulations." I said, "Look, you're giving me the credit. These other people are doing all the work. My staff told me to show up. Here's your script. Here's what you got to say.
Amazing.
This is what you got to do." And it
Amazing.
was as good as anything I've experienced. And the best thing about it was I had nothing to do with it, Keith. And
Yeah.
this is the thing I try to tell people, who has your back? If they made a mistake, well, you know what? I have your back. And you can't lead alone. You got to be collaborative. If they work with people, if they're working for you, they're going to be intimidated, you know. But before we shift to another thing that I want to talk about, which is authority, I want to go to AI for a second, if you don't mind.
Please.
Okay.
We met at
talked about
Peter
using-
Diamandis' conference.
Yeah, exactly. And we talked about AI enhancing this collaboration, the spirit of collaboration. So give me some of your thoughts there on that.
Gosh, well, right now, so I coach executive teams, mostly in the Fortune 500, but I've also joined the team at Lightspeed Venture Capital, and I coach their portfolio companies. So the Anthropics, the Gleans, the AI first companies. And it is amazing to watch these young companies and not only what they're creating with AI, but how they work with AI. And one of the things that I'm awakening to is that these kids out of Stanford, they have no burden of the old bullshit way that most hierarchical organizations work, where the org chart defines who your team is. These young entrepreneurs are working in teams actually around KPIs, meaning key performance indices or goals create a team. It's almost like a SWAT team coming together to get stuff done, dissipating, etc. It's absolutely inspiring to see what's going on there. I sit in the rooms with the Fortune 50, and I see some of the things that they're saying, which is, let's figure out how AI will allow us to reduce our cost basis by 30% overall and improve our customer experience and product quality. And this is the path that these companies are on. I just wrote a piece for Fast Company about Michael Dell and Dell Technologies. I think they're the first company, you can tell me if I'm wrong, they're the first company in the Fortune 500 that I know of that have split their revenue growth with their cost curve. So they've grown, they were able to report a massive, I think it was $5 billion lift in revenue, while at the same time, a 4% reduction in costs, all focused on their AI efforts. And they didn't try to spread the peanut butter across every single person in 400 initiatives. They said in supply chain, we're going to reduce supply chain costs by 20%. We're going to put a time back in the hands of sales reps, let's say a day a week. We're going to improve engineering productivity by 25%. Boom, boom, boom. And they took a CTO, John Rose, and focused all of his attention and all of the initiatives on those things, and they crushed it in 18 months. I do not see that. And they wouldn't be able to do it if the team didn't come around that. That executive team had to marshal all of their forces, stop spreading peanut butter, and drive results. And they've done it. And it's extraordinary to see what AI is doing in the large enterprises. And I'm so inspired by what's about to happen in the next 18 months for almost every company.
Well, listen, he's a huge, he's a huge role model for all of us, Michael. And you may not know this, Keith, but he was my first investor at Skybridge. I met Michael in 1993. And when I left Goldman Sachs in 96, he gave me a little bit of money to run. And when I started Skybridge, he was the first money into Skybridge. So I've had a
You probably got to know Adam, his brother and investment
Adam,
partner.
I know Adam, I know Susan, and obviously I know his team at MSD Capital. But what I would say about Michael is he has execution skills second to none. And he's probably listening to you, Keith, because he's a sharer. He understands that he can't get there by himself. Reagan had this plaque in the Oval Office right on the desk. It said, you can get anywhere you want in life as long as you don't care who gets the credit.
Amen to that.
Michael has done that his whole career. And so lots of kudos to Michael Dell. I want to ask you about authority. Because I think you write about authority in a way that I see authority, but in a way that others perhaps don't see authority. So let's talk about authority and your view on authority. Just explain it to our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I wrote a book called Leading Without Authority.
Right, exactly.
And and the point of it was this. If you want to be big, like if you want to punch way over your weight, then you've got to enable other people to achieve the things that you're hoping to achieve. You got to co-create. You've got to expand that team. And when I work in large organizations, the kind of change, like I just mentioned that Michael Dell was able to achieve, the kind of change that is needed right now with the volatile marketplaces, with AI as a massive disruptor, that change doesn't happen in your silo as a leader. If you're trying to take 20% out of supply chain, I learned this from my friends at A.T. Kearney, who are major supply chain re-engineers. If you're the procurement guy, you can't do it. You need sales forecasting, and you need the sales folks. You need supply chain. You need manufacturing and operations scheduling. You need that whole thing. That's the team. And so the sub-optimization of thinking that you can transform in your silos will make you a mediocre leader. And so the point is, when you realize that you no longer are, so many of these executives that I see, they're trying to gain control. Well, just give me, sales. If I'm the head of marketing, or I'm head of sales, just give me marketing and I'll make it work. No, you've got to realize, how do you co-create with people across the silos outside of your own organizations? I'm working with organizations today. I'm saying to them, do you think you're going to be as good as the 100 best AI programmers that truly understand these LLMs? No. And by the way, they're never going to come to work for you. So how do you partner? How do you partner with these young founders fundamentally differently? So large organizations are going to have to get rid of the hubris of ownership. Executives have to get rid of the hubris of control and authority to be big. And so, you talk about yourself. That's what makes, look at your brand. Look at who you are. You've been able to do that by stitching together relationships, building partnerships, and working outside of the ecosystem of control.
It's brilliantly said, and I just wanted to make sure that was shared with you. Okay, so we've got a couple minutes left. I picked 5 words from your books, not just the last book. And this is a little bit of a raw shot test at the end of our podcast. I'm going to say the word, and then you're going to give me a 1 or 2 words or a sentence, okay? So if I say the word teamship, you say what, Keith?
Let your team lift each other up.
Okay. What about leadership?
Get out of the way and stop being hub and spoke.
Okay, let's go back to authority. I say the word authority.
It will hold you back. Work more toward co-creation and inspiration.
Yeah, and that's so much more empowering, right? And it gives people a lot more entrepreneurial flexibility in your organization. What about relationships? Never eat lunch alone. What about relationships, Keith?
It truly, I could get emotional about it. It truly is defining of who you will be in the future. It's the relationships that you have. And now, by the way, I just got married since I saw you.
Congratulations.
And, all of the relationships in our life. I'm about to head out tomorrow to Burning Man with my sons.
All right, awesome.
All of the relationships with your life will be the most defining elements of your life. It will define your success and it'll define your joy.
So I'm with you, man. That's the whole thing that matters to me. It could be, it could be an Italian thing too, in terms of our culture.
Yeah, I think it is actually.
All right. So last 2 words, and then I'm going to give you the last word. Keith Ferrazzi.
Oh, wow. Humbly hasn't started yet.
Becoming, right? Becoming.
Yeah.
You see,
It's
I love
just
that.
like, look, my old man said, the most important thing on this planet is that you make the biggest footprint that you can and be of service in the meantime. And so I'm still trying to work my way to be of greatest service while I'm here.
Well, I'll just share this with you. Warren Buffett is about to turn 95. And if you ask him, how's he doing? He says, well, I'm just getting started. Okay. And you got to think like that about your life. You got to stay young. I really appreciate you joining us. The title of the book is Never Lead Alone. Keith Ferrazzi, thank you so much for joining us today on Open Book.
Anthony, thanks so much. Cheers.